Well, it's past noon now on April Fool's Day, April the 1st, so I'm hoping it's safe to come out. I do stay away from social media as much as I can in the morning of April Fool's Day. But I suppose we all feel a bit better after we've allowed ourselves a bit of larking around, don't we? April Fool's Day, with its focus on pranks and jokes, it isn't directly referred to, funnily enough, in the Bible. It's a much more modern invention. But the Bible does have quite a lot to say about wisdom and foolishness. For example, Psalm 14:1 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They're corrupt, their deeds are vile, there's no one who does good. Now that verse challenges the idea of denying God's existence as the ultimate folly. Look around you, look at the stars above and the earth below. Look into the Bible and check its claims and invalidate them. Well, of course, Scripture's very clear that to simply say there's no God and walk away is not wise, because there could be, and he could be somewhere you haven't been looking yet. And Scripture goes on from there. It's very clear that foolishness is not good for your health, mental or physical. In fact, Proverbs 26:11, as a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. That doesn't sound very healthy, does it? And that proverb, well, obviously it speaks about the repetitive, self-destructive nature of foolishness. But then there's the apparent paradox of 1 Corinthians 1 to consider, because surprisingly there, 1 Corinthians 1:18, Paul writes this, the message of the cross is foolishness. Hang on, look again. Doesn't stop there. Is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. What you got there in that verse is highlighting the truth of the gospel seeming foolishness to those who won't accept it. Well, obviously what's been shown there is that perceptions of what is and isn't in fact foolishness can be deceptive, and if we're not careful, subject to our own subjective wills and wants. Now, of course, April Fool's Day is a secular tradition, but these are verses that remind believers to consider the deeper implications of wisdom and foolishness in life and in faith, not just taking someone else's word for what's daft, but being ready to look into it, investigate more carefully for yourself. And that's possibly why foolishness is actually a fairly major biblical theme. The contrast between foolishness and wisdom is a major theme throughout Scripture. And it's interesting to think, isn't it, about how it connects with a day like April Fool's Day. Biblically, foolishness isn't about being silly or playful. It's more about moral, spiritual blindness, the lack of wisdom that doesn't want to look when there's something that could well be there and could well be important. A fool in biblical terms is someone who rejects God's presence, guidance, wisdom, or just persists in wrongdoing in spite of the warning consequences. And that makes April Fool's Day quite an interesting moment to reflect on the difference between light-hearted folly and the kind of foolishness the Bible warns against. One positive aspect, of course, of April Fool's Day is it often encourages us not to take ourselves too seriously. Humour and humility can go hand in hand. And the Bible obviously supports a spirit of joy and light-heartedness when it's not at the expense of others and isn't harmful. Proverbs 17:22, a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And sometimes laughter, bit of playful fun, bit of banter can be a way to refresh the soul. But the New Testament goes a bit beyond that, and it makes a fascinating link between the language of folly and arguably the Bible's central message and event. It speaks, you see, of the folly of the cross. Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 1:18 remind us that what is foolishness in the eyes of the world in general lies at the heart of the cross. On Good Friday, the world looked at Jesus mocked, beaten, crucified, and saw a failure. But from God's perspective, it was the most profound act of wisdom and love. And in a way, that paradox should challenge us to rethink what it means to be wise or foolish from an eternal perspective in God's eyes. There's grounds for redeeming apparent foolishness. And Christians might want to consider how to respond to a day like today, like April Fool's Day, by using it to reflect on the ways we sometimes play the fool in our own lives by ignoring God's guidance, repeating mistakes, thinking we know better. It can be an opportunity to seek wisdom afresh and ask God to reveal areas where we've been spiritually foolish. Well, I don't know. What are your thoughts about this? Any of it resonate with how you view April Fools? Folly and wisdom in general? How do you set about getting wisdom on a day like this? And what, if anything, has any of this got to teach us today? Happy April Fool's Day.